Hello, everybody. This is Maciej Szczerba, and this is 14th episode of my podcast, Sherpa Search on Tech. This is a very special episode because it touches a very important issue, which is bias in AI, bias in artificial intelligence. And today I have a team of three fantastic guests, both practitioners and academics as well. Let me introduce them. Elsa Sklavounou, who is a senior manager at head of partnerships globally at RWS, which is a major automated translation company. Also a Ph.D. from the University Paris 8. And Elsa's unique experience is that she's both a computer scientist and a linguist as well, or even neurolinguist. Marijn Markus, managing consultant at Capgemini, public speaker, keynote speaker, thought leader, and also very interesting fact, a social scientist by training. And Matt Fornito, transformation advisor, artificial intelligence transformation advisor to Fortune 500 companies, also public speaker, and a leading thought leader in the US in the area of AI. So thank you very much, guys, for joining me to this afternoon or this morning, right? Depends where we are. And maybe we'll start with a very bold question from the beginning. So what makes artificial intelligence biased? Because this is a topic which is very much in the media. Is data biased, or algorithms are biased, or maybe it's people who, let's say, who produce data and algorithm biased at the end of the day? What is your opinion?
May I start with an example?
Sure.
I started in the field of data science around 6-7 years ago, back when I was still studying as a social scientist, so sociology, criminology, a lot of statistics. And I was modeling the spread of crime in my hometown of Rotterdam. And Rotterdam in the Netherlands, like biggest harbor in Europe, 80% of all cocaine passes through our harbor. A lot of harbor, a lot of cocaine, a lot of crime. I was modeling, and I had a lot of bias in my data back then. Like, people get stabbed, but we don't register where people actually get stabbed. Like, we register the body part, but we don't register which street or which neighborhood. We usually register the closest police station, because that's the only address that the officer knows. So when I look at my data, it shows that a lot of the stabbing incidents all happen at police stations, because that's the only thing we had data on when it came to the addresses. This is an obvious example of bias in AI, but it's not a bias is bad. No, it's a bias needs you need to know where it's coming from, and then you can fix it. But back then we didn't call it data science. We didn't even call it AI. We just called everything big data, because the bias thing in human behavior, as well as data derived from it, is about as old as data itself, and is about as old as mankind itself. It's just over the last 6-7 years we started calling everything AI and algorithms because it sounds fancy. Because I told my current employer about this crime model I built, and they said, wow, that's cool, that's data science. And I said, because I needed a damn job. That's how I became a data scientist.
If I may add, it is interesting how you kick off the discussion, In fact, if I may add, first of all, this question, Maggie, is a research question. Okay, we talk about bias because everybody, we are looking at scientists, how AI performs in comparison to how people are behaving in society. What is very interesting is that I believe that we need to start from the diversity, first of all. That means that in human societies, we have a diversity of opinion that we try in a certain way to align in order to be objective in statements. Now, the bias comes when we see that this diversity, in a certain way, it's not as respected as we should like. But I fully agree, after all, it's mankind. And as the machine learning processes based on data are using statistics, definitely statistically we mirror more the mankind's diversity of opinion than in data than anything else. So we can discuss about bias in artificial intelligence, but why not talk about how we bring inclusivity in artificial intelligence, how we make the impact of artificial intelligence more beneficial. So if I may, my contribution in that discussion, and thank you for having me, and thank you for being, I'm very happy I'm with you all. It is the idea of how artificial intelligence can make an impact as an inclusive, collaborative, impactful tool for society. That's the point, without talking that much about the bias, because after all, bias is some research statement for, in my opinion.
Matt?
Sure. And yeah, I agree. Thanks for having us. I really enjoy doing these. Data in and of itself is not biased, right? The data is not subjective. Data is intrinsically based on what is imputed by humans and what we decide to collect. And so when we look at this from a modeling perspective, if we don't collect the right data or not enough data, then we have a high error term, right? Or low predictability. And that's due to the fact that there's something that we are not cognizant of. Now we can end up getting into humanistic bias and manipulation of data to say what people want data to say. But the reality is that data is not going to be biased by itself. It's going to be biased because of the data that's collected or not collected, just as allusions to drug use and going through those supply channels. If you're not collecting the right data, then you can't get the right predictability and actionability, right? And that ends up creating bias, whether you're looking at where to invest more dollars, what problem you're trying to solve. And so the reality is we need to think through data collection from all the different viewpoints, right? As a psychologist, as a sociologist, as an economist, as a business leader, to understand what are the important features that we need to be collecting, and what are proxy variables that allow us to ascertain information that we might not generally be able to collect, so we can create a more holistic view of whatever problem we're trying to solve, as opposed to having large gaps in our data set today.
Right. Is it like always big data sets are better to eliminate bias, or maybe they do not necessarily help? It's, I would say, on one hand, you know, this is, let's say, making AI better trained on collecting ever more data. This is, let's say, Chinese approach, I would say. And the Silicon Valley approach is to fine-tune algorithms, very much simplifying this, but I think this is the case.
So We'll answer that two ways, right? From the mathematical or modeling standpoint, if you look at a basic uniform distribution, right? The standard bell curve. In psychology research, it's as low as 30 participants to be able to get a uniform bell curve. And so if that's the case, you can have really small data sets to produce some sort of significant impact or outcome when you're testing a hypothesis. When you get into machine learning, needs more data. When you get into deep learning, needs much more data, right? But it also depends on where and how that data is collected and labeled. So if we take a current event of the Russian-Ukraine war, if we polled the entire world in regards to their opinion on the war, we would get one expected outcome, right? But if we polled, let's say, within Russia, whether it's all of Russia or, you know, a small subset of it, we're probably going to see a very different picture of what that looks like in regards to perceptions of the war, right? And so it's not necessarily about the amount of data, which sure, we'll get to a more accurate population distribution, but it's about where and how that data is collected as well to know if we're actually answering the question from a culturally holistic perspective. Agreed, Matt. It's not about, okay, the amount of size jokes I can make here are off the record, so I'm not going to do that. But it depends on what you want to achieve, what goal you have. Is it image recognition? Do you want to run a logistic regression or something simple? Then a sample size 100 observations is fine. If you want to train an image recognition model to recognize cats, or a more recent example, to recognize Russian soldiers crossing borders, you're gonna need a whole lot more data. And in the latter case, that data is kind of hard to attain. And I have a ton of students nowadays who enter into this field, who enter my teams nowadays, because I mainly manage data science teams, that were taught a ton of different methods, everything from very simplistic random forest models to deep learning. And they ask, what models should I apply? But it's not your job as an AI person or as a data science person to just build the model that they ask for, but to figure out what model they need and then to build that. And that model also in large part determines how much data you're going to need. Because the simplest explanation is usually the best.
At the same time, I would have added that instead of talking about goals, I was thinking about first what we would like to reproduce. Are we going to reproduce the reality itself, what we think about the reality, or leave the artificial intelligence guide us through its own lessons throughout the learning process? Depending on what we want to reproduce, it's also the definition of the data sets that we are going to use for each of the applications that you just pointed out. So this is it's like an educational process. There are students that are repeating what they read in the books, and there are others that they rephrase what they read in the books. Both have the same level of knowledge, but they express it in a completely different way. So I believe it is there the very interesting point is that let's imagine we have a virtual student that we are going to learn to inject knowledge on something that we would like he will be able to reproduce in his way, her way, our way. And there is where we define the data sets we are using.
I'm not a practitioner. Okay, Marijn?
I may add to that just a little bit. I think in the field of AI, more data has become a cheat code in a way. Because of all the GPU-based solutions we have, that usually more data gives you more performance, gives you better models. We educated a whole generation on only being able to solve a problem, build a model, if there's a ton of data and a ton of examples, and they're stuck just like I was, if you don't have that. But the real art is to make do with what you've got. If I may take the Ukraine war as a terrible example here, if you're using literal Tinder to track the movement of Russian soldiers, which they were doing in the first 2 months of the war, it's hilarious, you ain't got a lot of data. And you're not going to get a lot of data, but you got to make do with what you have. And that is the real data science part.
I believe outside the volume, I believe outside the volume of the data itself, it's more the diversity that the deep learning procedures or processes need in order to gain in precision. So I do believe that we don't use a huge amount of data because we need a lot of data in order to train. It's because we need the more diversity possible, so as the vectors that are going to be generated gain in precision. Diversify the applicability of something that we are going to look for in a way that we can create comparative situations that we can normalize depending on the reproduction, on what we are seeking in doing. I don't believe that we go after the volume of data because somebody told us that we need gigas and gigas. The only thing we know is that the more data, the more diversity there will be in that data. Now, the very interesting part is how smartly we use this diversity through labeling process or through extrapolating some data sets depending on the source of the communication, the type of images, if it is a computer vision, or the type of content, if it is NLP.
So, as a pseudo add-on, as we're slowly moving towards low-code and no-code environments, what I've articulated I don't want to be detrimental to data scientists or those going into the field, but to go in and say, build a random forest model, 6-10 lines of code, right? Like you can essentially train a kid how to do that now in regards to the libraries and packages that are available. What's really important is kind of the prognosis that my grad school advisor had, right? Do you take a spaghetti against the wall approach, which, if you haven't heard the term, is you take all of your data, throw it against the wall and see what sticks, right? And so that mentality of just throwing all data into a model and seeing what emerges is very, very different to a hypothesis-driven approach to saying, this is an outcome I'm trying to solve. What do I think are the predictors that contribute to that outcome? And if you're taking that approach, you're not getting multiclinearity, miscorrelation of variables, all these other things statistically that are problematic, but you're also having a data scientist understand why they're building a model and how it will be leveraged, as opposed to just trying to build the most accurate model possible today.
That is the difference between building a model and a good model.
Great.
That is the science part in data science that we often forget.
Yeah, but it is like you say, somebody is a good citizen and somebody else is a bad citizen.
Mm-hmm. So I'm
Being
not
a good citizen is boring.
That's a very interesting reaction, and I mean, I don't know. For me, I don't know. I cannot disconnect people from data the way you said at the very beginning. So now the qualification of data as a computing tool is, I believe, it is something far more granular, than saying that data is biased or not. I would have said, is this, are we talking about genuine data, authentic data, prefab data, natural data, or in fact, the source of the data itself, I do believe, plays a huge role. And then what triggers, after all, the result of the model, what we call a model, which is a result of a compilation based on data as a compiling tool. It is the question we ask to this model. You have seen reactions, for instance, on what is happening with Chat GPT right now. When there are thoughtful questions, everybody's impressed about the result of Chat GPT. And when we are asking questions that you cannot even address to your peers, then you do see that the artificial intelligence is replying in a way that shows you that you are not accurate in the question itself. So yes, the model is number one. Afterwards is the way you interrogate the model, which is very interesting to show if there is bias in people, in society, or in data, or in the three, let's say, parts of this ecosystem, which is called society, or human life, or human society.
Is it all not only a social issue, but is it a business problem, to be honest? Because there are some cases like you must have heard with Apple Card, who partnered, I guess, with MasterCard, and Steve Wozniak tried it, and he got 10 times more credit on the card than his wife because he's male. Or these cases of recruitment at Amazon or IBM. Let's say that they had more pictures of white people than black people. So black people were, let's say, kind of discriminated. Is it, let's say, the case that the big business will take care more of the data to train models because they are losing either money or they are losing their PR, their image?
Bias in data is everyone's problem, basically. We used to claim it's just a thing for data people, for IT, and we don't talk about IT. Most companies don't want to talk about IT, but as it happens to be, IT is the only field in the whole market still growing. Every company out there, every business out there will either become an IT company, a data-driven company, or become a dinosaur and go extinct. So, especially for companies and businesses who want to become data-driven and do decision-making based on data rather than their gut feeling, which is still the norm for most, bias in data is already or will become a problem for them. It is everyone's problem. And if I explain to my mom what my job is, yeah, he does something with computers, that doesn't cut it anymore because 1 in 3 jobs involves doing something with computers nowadays. So you can't classify it as, is it a business problem, yes or no, because it affects everything in the same way that the radio and the typewriter affected every damn job on the planet, except the few who said, no, I don't need to learn to use a computer, my job is way too valuable, who all got automated the hell away.
And so I would have added, what is the field of observation also? For instance, Maggie, you have been referring about pictures of black people and white people. If you see Hollywood, how attentful is when they are doing casting of movies in a way that they have an equity in between black actors and white actors, then you won't have exactly the same observation if you are sticking eventually only in Europe, or if you are sticking in different regions of the world. So what is very interesting is how globally we observe. Are we observed globally or we are observed locally? That's a very interesting reaction, I believe. What is the type of paradigm that we are using as a model of our own conception first, in order to define how artificial intelligence is behaving or not? How global we are in our perception, first of all, or how local we are in our perception. I don't know.
I think it's a kind of local rather. I will tell you a funny story. So I don't know, one of the big firms in Poland had an advertisement, let's say, whatever, join us, and there were people in conference room. And of course, like it's the global policy, they are to be from different races, which I find it right. But they criticized, a lot of people on LinkedIn criticized that they removed a black guy. Because we have very few black people in Poland. We do have people of Vietnamese origin, we have people of Indian origin, immigrants from those countries, but it's very rare that you see a black person. And some people from other countries criticized this change of the advertisement that this is racist, which is absurd to me.
Well, and there's, you know, explicit versus implicit, right? If no one's ever had an interaction with a black person before, they're not explicitly racist, right? And so as we, you know, get into more diversity of gender identification and sexual preferences and all these, what matters in regards to data collection and what doesn't, right? Because maybe we don't even need to be collecting on those variables in the first place. Maybe we do, and we could think about that. And I'm sure we'll continue to iterate on that as time goes on. I think in regards to your business question, what's interesting to me is the discrepancy or differences between the US and Europe, right? Because we don't have GDPR. Looking at this from, we could say, TikTok and data collection, right? Or Meta, or even like what JP Morgan and other banking institutions have intrinsically done to bias against like mortgage loans in regards to certain races, right? The fines are so minimal compared to the revenue they generate that they don't necessarily care, or they actually don't care, because the business impact is stronger than the cost of doing that business, right? And so from the US side, it becomes a bit more problematic because we're incentivizing businesses to use humans as data collection mechanisms, as opposed to humans get to own their own identity through that data and choose what to share to benefit their own lives.
To share one last terrible example on data and bias, because we're like four white folks talking about ethnical bias. When I was modeling crime for Rotterdam, and Rotterdam is one of the most diverse cities over here because it's a major port city, has been for hundreds of years. So you have all races, all ethnicities, all parts of the world, all the food, the best food, non-Dutch food. But if I use that as a predictor of crime, then I got a high score, because concentration of minorities is usually, in my model, a great predictor of stabbing and drug-related crime, which is not a causal effect, of course, but the model doesn't know that. And that's why you always need a human in the loop to look at the model and then control for, in my case, levels of poverty and levels of lower income, because that was the real predictor. But the low income neighborhoods are also the more ethnically diverse neighborhoods. So the model thought, this is where the crime is coming from. And there's no amount of AI that will be able to explain the causal mechanisms there unless a human looks at it. And that's why we together as human and machine can explain this stuff better than we do it separately. So we love to give the examples of the machine going evil, blah, blah, discriminatory. But I studied humans for 4 years and we're real good at being racist bastards too. and I need data and I need models to prove our human bias.
We have touched this issue, but let's say, what can we do to ensure that data reflects society better, Matt?
Yeah, and that's where, for me, when you look at most data scientists today, they're coming from computer science, mathematics, or hard sciences. And the problem with that is that you don't understand systems in regards to business and how networks are interconnected. You don't understand people, and you don't understand economics, right? Now some do take those courses, and I highly recommend that to any students I mentor as well. Is the more diversified you are, the more you're able to really think through all of the processes to make sure that you're collecting and leveraging the right data. So it becomes very, very problematic if you have someone who's very technical and can build a model, but they don't think through what are the problems with this, or what data did I not collect that is causing that issue, right? And I think exactly to the previous point of the last conversation, there were things I didn't know until one of my undergrad degrees is sociology, right? And there were things I didn't know, because you would see news reports in the US saying, they purported, let's see, there were 10 times more Black crime or African American crime shown on TV compared to white crime. The numbers, or at least percentages, were actually extremely equal. And the crime was generally within race, no matter what race it was, right? So you also had media creating cognitions or perceptions, fear tactics of things that aren't actually occurring, right? Which is another different issue that we have in the US, respectively compared to data. But when we talk about manipulation of data to create outcomes that you want, the news is a very prime source in the US for that.
Much as I like to point fingers at media, I have to mention here that there's a toxic incentive here, in that bad news and outrageous news and stuff like black on black violence also gets more responses from the population. Thus, the media is incentivized to keep pushing bias in their media. I'm not saying that's okay, not at all. But it is more than just the media does this. They are incentivized to do so by us. And that's where things get complicated.
In fact, the moderation of this kind of content, no matter how it is expressed, it can be expressed through natural language or through an image or through any other type of media assets. We could expect that the moderation, a partial or an impartial moderation, can be driven through labeling processes, in a way that we do know that there are technologies outside that they can validate how inclusive is a content or not, where the bias can be found, and have a human in the loop moderation through labeling process, in a way that we can highlight the data that we would like to include, exclude, or put into validation before inserting it in deep learning processes.
As an actual sociologist with a degree who still got a job, Dad, I have to point out here that we often nowadays point at algorithms to combat these biases, these forms of fake news, or as we in science used to just call it propaganda, because it is still propaganda from the 60s, 70s, and now it's happening in real life. It's like really weird. I used to study this. And we see all the social media giants, especially Zuckerberg, propose to fix the stuff themselves. Facebook will implement algorithms to sort out fake news. But it's the algorithms that are causing this issue as well. This is like tasking the criminal with solving and fixing their own damage. Of course, the criminal will want to do that because that means the police won't bother them. There is a huge issue right now in that we keep giving the same corporates or large organizations who caused this issue the task of solving it. And I'm pretty sure they will do it as easily and cheaply and inefficiently as possible, because again, as Matt just righteously pointed out, they are profit driven. They won't fix this. They will do lip service.
Which there's even within us in the field, AI is accelerating at a rate too fast to keep tabs and monitor, much less when you look at corporations understanding the potential damages, much less politicians understanding what the heck's going on. And it reminds me of the line is, who will watch the watchman, right? If there's no one left to look over and monitor what these models or algorithms are actually doing and what biases they are inferring, then we don't know the reparations and harm that will occur because of that.
And many of them would like it to stay that way. I've had too many projects where we blame the data or blame bias in our data. I was forecasting burnouts or analyzing burnouts for a large company, and I found that 4 managers were basically causing the majority of burnouts in that company. So I presented my model to management. I was young then. I was so proud. This is how the model works, and these 4 managers are the suckers causing it. They were in the audience. You can guess what happened next. They said I did a bad job, my model was terrible, and it was probably racist and sexist. So they blamed the data, they blamed the model because they didn't want to face up to the consequences of their own actions, which had just happened to have caught in that model. We love to blame the data so we can avert blame ourselves. And the best way to avert blame ourselves is by making sure nobody tracks it. So there's stuff we don't want to catch in data.
I agree. At the same level, we position always the debate at the research and not in the application of the research in production or in the industry. In fact, we all agree that we can find bias in data. The way we can find bias in the society. Our work, I believe, and our contribution is how we deal with that in a way that the product that we are going to generate outside any type of AI-based technique is going to meet a need in the market. And how this need in the market will, in a certain way, improve the social life. After all, the industrialization and all we are doing is because we want to improve our lives, right? So I do believe that, yes, we know, all of us, what there is out there in societies, in data, in images, in everything we live every day. But at the same time is how we transform it in something useful, in something that will improve the future lives. So that might be interesting to turn it around and say, okay, how can I check inclusivity in the AI that I built out of this? How can I check the positive impact or the negative impact? It is the reason why I was asking about the glocal is very interesting that right now what is happening in Davos, they call it Village. The new initiative, which is high-tech driven, they call it as a global collaboration village. Now, the global collaboration village, it needs to convene, create, and take actions for global cooperation, but it is a village, interactivity, inclusivity, and impact as a platform. So, after all, we are going down to little entities, and we try through technology to globalize the impact in a cooperative, collaborative, and inclusive environment. So I believe that that's how we try to transform bias through the modelization to something that might have positive impact in societies afterwards.
I don't believe in Davos. I think all these guys mingle there just to make more money.
I'm not telling I believe in Davos or not in Davos. I'm just taking the trends and the words that they are using in order to address new challenges in what is happening in the world economies. I'm not saying if I believe or I don't believe. We have some facts, we have data, we work, all of us, each of us in business, and we are trying to deliver something that is going to meet the expectations of our customers. Now, of course, we might, the modelization of based on data might show some discrepancies, which is totally human after all. The thing is that are those discrepancies helping to have a positive impact on what we are trying to improve, or it's something that it is just reproducing something, reproducing the reality. We say, okay, I just reproduce the reality. It's how we go beyond all that in order to construct a better world. For me, that's the most important. Even if scientifically speaking, I can see bias in the world every day, in the data every day. The thing is, what is the paradigm that I would like to represent in order to make the world better, the business processes better, less crime, less war. I don't know. That's my challenge personally, and I believe the human in the loop is the approach that will allow in a certain way to bring wisdom in this automated deep learning process through labeling.
I wanted to say something that just went out of my mind, but wanted to refer to what Elsa has just said, but lost it.
Yeah. Do you have anything to say, given that you've been quiet for a while?
Look, we're always going to have a conflict, a push-pull of the humanistic side and the capitalistic side, right? And there are good leaders out there that are creating AI companies that are leveraging data to create positive impact, whether that's saving lives from forest fires to using GPUs and deep learning for MRI imaging, right, for anomaly detection. There's a huge ability for us to create a monumentally positive impact for our generation as well as the next generations. The issue or concern is really going to be the reality of, if we go back to the very beginning, generally speaking, the more data you have, the more apt you are to be able to answer questions. And so the very large companies, whether that's the banking institution, social media, anything you can think of, they have an extremely high competitive advantage that mitigates the ability for smaller companies to end up actually creating that acceleration and drive to be transformative. And that leads to a problem where those companies are often acquired, whether to be dismantled or ingested in, and often not leveraged within the frameworks of the larger company that acquired them.
Yeah, I now reminded myself what I wanted to say. Let's say, picking up the maths thought, let's who's to watch the Watchmen. What do you think about regulating AI and data? Because in the EU there is a draft already of regulating AI. I think in the US it's enacted in California, where all the big tech is, or apart from Microsoft. So what do you guys think about this idea, Matt?
Yeah, so from the US perspective, we can talk globally too, but at least from the US perspective, the more educated you are, especially in regards to data and technology, but just as a whole, the more educated you are, the more conscientious you are of what the potential impacts are of data, right? And that's in large part why California is ahead of the curve. And obviously Europe was smart with GDPR to make sure that individuals had control of, essentially their own rights. We're at an apex point now where we're going to decide if people are commodities or if people are part of a system that are trying to, using the phrase, a rising tide raises all ships, right? We can look at this as an approach to better all of society, or we can look at it as human are cattle, right? And the data they provide allows them to essentially monetize and manipulate behaviors. So the reality is we need ethical AI rules and regulations, and we need better control and management of data on the individual level to ensure our sustainability in the future.
Yeah, and fully in sync with you, fully in sync with that. And I believe that what regulates, after all, AI is the monetization of the AI itself, not that much the scientific methods that you're producing AI, but how you monetize it.
Much as I would like to say AI is completely new, this is the same mechanism we see with any new technology introduced in a part of the world. Legislation is running in panic because it takes some years, if not decades, to finally start regulating it. In between, it becomes the new driver of both wealth and inequality. If we're talking about bias, let's talk about bias at scale inequality at a societal level, because technology is just the next dimension used to drive that inequality, even though it could indeed help to lift us all up. But we also must memorize in this case that the same technology, like the radio before it, like television before it, is also used to help fight that inequality. We just mentioned crime fighting, where blacks are shown more often on television. In American systems, because that's what I had a lot of data on, my country, Netherlands, is like really small. We don't have enough data. We proved statistically that in the 80s and 90s, judges gave Afro-American men harsher sentences for the exact same crime, which is a terrible thing. But how did we prove it? Because the judge just said, no, but we had decades of data, and we had regression models back then, which we used to prove this was happening in papers, in scientific papers, to speak truth to power. And that too is where data and technology can make a difference. And that's why in like 2008-9 during WikiLeaks, I fell in love with this field. Because the same techniques used to oppress can be used to educate and to uplift.
Totally.
Drop mic.
In fact,
is there, I don't know if there's one more question you want me to get through before, and then if you guys want to cut back to this, if you're doing editing. But since I have to leave in 2 minutes, if there's one more you want me to answer, otherwise, yeah, I can just drop in 2.
Right. So we know that, let's say, Matt has some very important meeting at his 10 hour 6. So do you want something to add on, Matt?
What's your favorite book?
God.
You have so many books there, dude. I've been waiting for this an whole hour.
I could go so many directions. I'd say one of, we'll say fiction-wise, Stephen King's Gunslinger series is the best archetypal hero's journey, if anyone's ever read it. but very, very fascinating, the trials and tribulations that people can go through to overcome adversity. What was one of the most impactful? I may have to look.
We actually got him to go quiet for a second. That hasn't happened before. Like mine in between is probably Neuromancer, written by William Gibson in 1983 and 84. And he talked about modern day internet like 20, 30 years before its time.
There's a,
at least we now know that ain't a wallpaper. It's an actual, oh, he's actually picking up a book.
So, favorite maybe Authentic Happiness by Marty Seligman. I had a Cambridge Press chapter on like positive psychology and have written and researched on motivation and productivity theories. So there's a lot in there that if we focus on gratitude and betterment, focusing on improving others, that we have much more authentic and happy lives. In regards to one of the favorite books to read was on Kevin Mitnick, and he was essentially can you see? Okay. And he was a hacker, essentially, and the FBI continuously came after him, and he gave the runaround for decades, and then finally got caught, and then ended up working with them in regards to being essentially a white hat hacker.
If I wanted,
well, I know I have to drop, but I do want to thank you guys all for the time. This has been a lot of fun, and certainly interested in seeing the rest of this podcast after you get it edited and produced.
Thank you very much, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks all. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.
In fact, it's interesting what kind of book an AI should have read. So if I would recommend a book to an AI to read, it is James Allen, 1903, As a Man Thinketh.
There is one book.
There is one book, and it is how artificial intelligence can work patiently and intelligently upon its thoughts to transform the circumstances. So maybe AI needs to read books more than humans.
At this point in time, isn't it the problem that the AI systems have already read all the books? If you look at ChatGPT, which is usually trained on dozens, if not pretty much all scientific literature available, which is also why if you write a paper or an article using ChatGPT, pretty much every plagiarism scan will immediately go red, as I see students doing a lot of the time. But that's just replicating stuff already written. It's not actually reading, it's just reproducing. And that, given the current ChatGPT panic that I see amongst academics, even my professor friends right now, is like, oh, but all the students they're not gonna read books anymore. They're not gonna write papers anymore. They're just gonna let it be auto-generated by an AI who already read the book. But the core problem is that it will only recreate, not generate content. And in the same way that the typewriter revolutionized the way we write papers, in the same way that autocorrect revolutionized papers, and both times we had naysayers saying like, oh, students shouldn't be allowed to use a word processor or an autocorrect anything, because then they won't be able to write properly anymore. Now we get students who generate the paper at the click of a button, but the real art is to not to write, but to rewrite it into a proper paper. Because, and then I'm done. The problem isn't that AI can generate papers as good as students. The problem is that some students write papers as badly as AI.
In fact, it's very interesting because it reminds me the calculators in math exams. When we were students in maths, we didn't have the right to use calculators, right?
It's the exact same.
Students, exactly, it's exactly the same. And now when you are going even in the more complex mathematical disciplines, you have sophisticated calculators that you're allowed to use in the exams. Okay, so that means that it is not that much, I believe, as an educational process. It is acceptable from the moment it still keeps the thought development around what you are trying to learn in order to reproduce in an authentic way.
If it's a core part of what you're learning, then yes. Like if you're learning math, write that stuff out. Don't use the calculator. But more than often, it is a crutch. And you see this happen even faster in my field of IT. 8 to 10 years ago, we all started out learning stuff like R and SAS. Now, I still love R, but that coding language is dying rapidly. Everyone switched to Python. Everyone 10 years ago was learning Pig and Hadoop. Hadoop was the solution to everything. Now nobody's using Hadoop anymore. Everyone's learning cloud platforms. In 5 to 10 years' time, those will all be outdated too. In the technical field, it's progressing so much faster. And then I see academics talking about whether or not you should be using autocorrect. And I'm like, dude, dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are cool, don't get me wrong. I love dinosaurs, especially as a kid. But the crazy thing is that it's only going to progress faster from now.
Yes, and we can be very creative with this progress. You see, I believe that we can construct another paradigm of education, in all the social activities in order to get access to the knowledge and information. I'm very. In fact, the background that we all have allow us to have some thoughts around artificial intelligence as a social technology product. The difference between the radio and the television that you have been saying that it's very interesting also. The particularity of the artificial intelligence, the way we see it, is that it is reproducing our everyday life by default, whereas the television and the radio is not reproducing everybody's life, but just somebody's.
We're going a bit off top.
Yep.
But let's say I will go a little bit off top too. There is a great book I can recommend from 2022. I don't know if you know it. It's called The Atlas of AI. And the author, you know it?
Yes.
You mentioned it before, then I Googled it.
Yeah,
yes, you mentioned it.
Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. And it's written, it's like a 19th century Baedeker kind of guide. But
great.
Now a question to Marijn, going again on topic. I don't know if you worked for some banking projects. So
what if I did?
Let's say without disclosing any names or so, totally anonymously. To be honest, over the last 10 years, I just got crazy, let's say, with all these credit ratings, because I absolutely don't understand how it's done and what labeling they use. Because sometimes, you know, when let's say my company was in good condition, they were saying no, and let's say after a couple of weeks they were, let's say, saying yes, you know, or offering me some, let's say, enormous private credit or so, calling me every day. So I'm just very curious about the problem. Let's say how is labeling and then how they are improving this.
Credit ratings amongst financial institutions is a great example of a much bigger AI-related societal problem, which is the inner workings of algorithms. Because the organizations do not want you to know exactly what data they use, especially acquired from third parties, to construct this credit rating about you. Maybe they buy your energy consumption from some third party thing. Maybe they got what websites you browse on your phone through Google. All of which serves as input because it's in their best interest to have the best accurate credit ratings using whatever kind of inputs. So complicated that many organizations themselves can't properly explain it. And this is where legislation should step in, but legislation
because it's unregulated.
That's the thing. This is where there should be regulation, but regulation is running 5 to 10 years behind what's actually happening technology-wise. GDPR tried to step in on this, but they went with vague statements like, yeah, it can't be biased. No model is unbiased. That doesn't exist. To the detriment of people and society at large. Now, the core issue here is that most of these models are incredibly complex to explain if you can explain them at all. That's where the whole deep learning thing comes in. I'm gonna use Amsterdam here as an example. The municipality of Amsterdam, like I'm from Rotterdam, we have a love-hate, mainly hate relationship with them.
I know.
They published an algorithm record online somewhere last year, meaning all the algorithms used in their organization, in their decision making, are published online. This is as it should be, not as it is. As it is, financial institutions do a lot of know your customer, do a lot of credit rating, but they don't tell you how it works, because if they tell you how it works, then you can actually see what bad stuff they're doing, and then you can address it. As long as you can't address it, as long as you don't have data, as long as you don't have transparency, you can't address it. And the same goes for Amsterdam, who built a real fancy, nice website about, this is the algorithm we use for parking. This is the algorithm we use for picking up the trash. But they don't publish code and they don't publish data. They just say, we are using this algorithm and we promise, pinky promise, it is unbiased. That is not how it works. You can't just have organizations say, no, we are very diverse and we don't discriminate. I promise. That's not how it works. You need actual transparency. You need to see the data. You need to see the models. And that is the type of transparency we do not have yet. And it will take us decades before we can attain it, because it will take decades before legal starts to enforce it.
And that's the regulation in place, in fact.
And I'm still waiting for that, but I've been waiting for 6 years in this field already. And the joke is, I use the very same models to point out bias. I'm a sociologist. I was trained to complain about discrimination against women, against minorities, against LGBT, everything. That's why I learned to use these models to point out the bias. And then people go like, why is there bias in the model? I'm like, there's supposed to be bias in the model, otherwise I can't measure it. And that's going to be my final point here. AI will die, but data will remain. Because we've been doing this for 20 years ago, and we'll be doing it 20 years in the future still, because at that point, there still won't be enough legislation. Technology will still be way ahead, and people will still have shit IT that they need to fix. So I'll always have a job, but I don't know, we'll be calling it quantum or something by then. It won't be AI anymore, but I'll still be doing the same thing that I like to do, using data to help people's lives.
Great. That's the best conclusion possible, Magic. I need to drop myself.
Okay.
Yeah. but I would need to drop. Would it be okay if you continue with Markus?
Apparently, I did a good
I love
ending.
it.
So thank you so
The
much
ending
for
is
having
perfect.
us.
Thank you, Elsa. Hope to see you
Thank you.
soon.
Yeah, thanks a
Take
lot.
care.
Huh?
Take care. I hope you enjoyed
Thank
my
you. Bye-bye.
Christmas tree. I left it up specifically for this. My mom thinks it's AI.
That's great. Thanks a lot. Huh? Bye.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.